notification. Just click OK, and then that will go away. Really grateful and delighted feels like the wrong word, but just great. I'll stick with grateful to be hosting this conversation at BJ today with three remarkable women. We're going to hear first from Laila Alsheikh and Robi Damelin, who are mothers who each lost children and have been, I'm not gonna, they'll tell their stories, but have been part of the organization Parent Circle, which brings Israeli and Palestinian and Arabs together, some people who've lost a family member, for all kinds of programming and reconciliation. And you'll hear a little bit about their stories. And then we'll hear from Leah Solomon, who's the Chief Education Officer at Encounter. I think many of you know about the work of Encounter, which brings American Jews to Israel and Palestine, the West Bank, to encounter Palestinians and explore different narratives, understand different narratives of the conflict and the history of that region. We wanted to bring this conversation to BJ. We started talking about this when I mean, things kind of always feel tense in the Middle East, but when the tensions were really up higher in the weeks following the war with Gaza and that the latest round of conflict, where I think a lot of us, myself included, were feeling a sense of yeush, of despair, like where could this ever possibly go, and what could ever possibly happen to change the situation. And we had, many of you I think were at the session with Moshe Halbertal, who provided some political analysis and his perspective. And then we felt we want to get into also just hearing more of the stories of people who are experiencing and living this day to day. And bring also Encounter's perspective and Leah's perspective, to offer us some hope, and I would say loving agitation as to what we could do, those of us who are American Jews or who are invested in seeing things change in the region. So that's the conversation today, is to really try to hear both from the stories and from some of the analysis of what are possibilities. How could we even look for a path forward and explore possibilities. I again want to invite folks to turn on their cameras. As Robi noted before, we're a small group. This will be an intimate conversation. We'd love to see your faces. I know some people don't have cameras or in places where that's not possible, but if it is possible, please do, so that we can really be in the learning and in conversation with each other. I'm going to introduce first Laila and Robi to hear their stories. And people are welcome to put questions in the chat as things emerge, as questions emerge, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat and bring those questions to our speakers. So welcome to Robi Damelin and to Laila Alsheikh. Really grateful to have you here. And I'm going to ask Laila to start with your story.
Yay! Before we do start, I just wanted to ask how much time you want to give us each, because I can waffle until tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Well, I think if you can each speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then I have some questions that I want to ask you, and there may be other questions that come up from the group, so we'll dig into some of those questions. But if you can, your initial presentation, 10, 12 minutes, and I'll keep an eye on the time.
Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm really so glad to be here today talking to you. And it's an honor again to be with Encounter for as I remember, maybe this is the third time. My name is Laila Alsheikh. I'm from Bethlehem. I'm from a village near Bethlehem called Batir. I was born and raised in Jordan. My family originally from Bethlehem, but they went to Jordan because my father was a teacher and he went to be a teacher for the refugees in Jordan. So after that, the war was happened in 1967, and the Israeli government take a decision not to allow them to came back. So in 1999, I was met my husband in Jordan, we engaged, and I came to Bethlehem at the same year to continue our marriage. And it was like a dream come true for every Palestinian who born outside Palestine to come back and live in. So it was amazing, and everything was as I imagined before, because always my father speak about Palestine and about the life that he have here. After 1 year, we have our second child, and we become happier that our family become bigger. And the next 2 months, the second uprising was a start, and we think that this will end too soon, but unfortunately, it was become worse every day. And I was really afraid because it was the first time I lived in that situation like that. But I wasn't scared because I have my own family. The next year, we have our second child. He was a boy. We named him Qusay, and he was very intelligent, beautiful boy. But the happiness was ended at the day of 11th of April 2002, when 4 o'clock in the morning, he was woke up in a very critical condition. And we tried to take him to a hospital inside Bethlehem, but the Israeli soldiers didn't allow us to enter because they said it's military zone. So the next chance was to take him to Hebron, but through a rough and long road because the main road was closed for the same reason. We faced another checkpoint. They stopped us more than 4 hours until they allow us to move. At the end of that day, my son was died because he was, or he should be in a hospital as soon as possible, and every minute was so important for his life, and that 4 hours was ended his life. From that moment, our life became upside down. The happiness was ended. Everything was changed. At that time, I wasn't think that to take revenge, because I was know that if I will take revenge, that will never bring anything back to my life. Maybe the only thing that will bring more problems and difficulties. But I take another decision that I didn't want to have any kind of relationship with any Israeli person for more than 16 years, until I met one of my friends, and he started to talk to me about the Burns Circle, and how he participated one of the project, and he started to talk to me about it. And then I stopped him and I said to him, you know what happened to me? How could you speak to me like that? And he said, because I know you and I know what happened to your child, I want to ask you a question. Why until now you didn't tell your other children about what happened to their brother? I told him because I didn't want them to be part of this cycle of violence. I didn't want to lose any one of them. I lost one of them, and that was much more than enough for me. So he kept calling me, and he invited me to a conference in Bethlehem for the forum. In the beginning, there were just Palestinian. We went there, start to meet with some of them. 5 minutes later, the Israeli started came and entered that room. I was think to leave. I start to feel that there's something in my chest start to ache me. I didn't want to see any one of them, but he said to me, please sit down and listen to them. And after that, you could take any decision you want, and I will never talk to you about this again. So the moment that they enter and start to hug each other and kiss each other like family members, not just friends. That was the start, because I was thinking at that moment, how could they do this after all these years of suffering and conflict? And what's the common thing that's make them so close to each other like that? So I decided to sit and listen to them. And when I start to hear their stories for the first time, especially the Israelis, I was really touched and moved and start to feel that they're human like me and we share the same pain, we share the same tears. And the hardest thing could happen to anyone in his life to lose a family member. And we could understand each other, each other's pain. And if sometimes we didn't speak to each other, just like when I looked to Ruby in her eyes, I could understand even the words that she couldn't say. So from that moment, I decided to participate one of the projects called Pearl Narrative Project. And we were a group of women, 30 Palestinian and 50 Palestinian and 15 Israelis. And for the first time, they asked us to say something happened to us during the conflict affecting our lives. So it was the first time I speak about what happened to my son. Since his death, I was kept all my feeling, all my memories inside me, didn't talk about it. And it was like to open the wound again after all these years. I couldn't complete the story in the middle of it. I started to cry. And I was amazed when an Israeli woman came and she sat in front of me and she started to apologize and said to me, I'm really sorry. I know that I didn't hurt you, but I know that the people who hurt you from my own people, and I'm a mother too. I could understand your pain. I could understand even the word that you couldn't say. And she came and hugged me. She didn't know that moment that by her simple words that she changed my whole life again and returned me back to life. Because her word was like light comes from a deep and dark place, open my heart and open my mind. Because sometimes when we feel of hatred and anger, that's covered our eyes and our heart to even to understand and realize the truth around us. From that moment, I decided to be a member of the forum, start to give lectures inside Israel, Palestine about peace and reconciliation, and all over the world. And the most important thing, not just to speak to the people about these beautiful words, but the most important thing to feel it from inside. Because if you didn't feel it and believe it from your heart, you will never how could I say it? You can't spread the message in the right way. So that was helped me in my life a lot during this 4 years, the transformation that happened to me and how I start to look to the others, even the Israelis, all the people around me, they start to feel the change which happened to me. After I met many Israelis, most of them, they become so close to me and they become the closest friend like Robi and other um, people on the forum. And some of them become much more closer than me, than my family members. Um, I start to think about forgiveness and how could I forgive those people who were responsible about the death of my son, and to be in the forum that give me a lot of information, a lot of things help me to get over that step and really forgive those people, not just because of them, even to let myself feel free to could continue this work, because I will never, I feel that I couldn't complete this journey without forgiveness. It's, yeah, it's personal choice, but I think was so important for me. And one of the other things that was important, to stop looking to myself as a victim and start to look to myself as a survivor. And that's really helped me a lot in my life and helped me to become another person. And one of the most important things that I have a friend and a sister like Robi, that every time I learn a lot from her, and she's blessed in my life, and I want to thank her a lot, and I want to thank God that He put me in this position. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laila. I'm gonna bring Robi into the conversation here, and then some questions for the two of you.
I don't even know where to start. You know, I was just thinking, before I even tell you my story, I was thinking about Ahmad. Ahmad was a member of the Parent Circle, Palestinian. She died 3 days ago. I loved her because she was a tough cookie and because she went through the most extraordinary transformation. You know, her story is really the story of the Palestinian history since the Nakba, since 1948. She was born in what is now Israel, and her family fled, and she was a baby, and she got left behind by mistake. And she was a very small baby and laid there for a couple of days. And then her brother, when they realized that she wasn't with them, flew back, went running back to take her, and she grew up in the Heschel refugee camp. And we were there yesterday, and you see, unless you know of these places, you can't imagine what it's like to live in a place like that and to grow up like that and to lose two brothers and then to become politically active and to find yourself, as she did, in jail for 5 years. And then when she came out of jail, she came to the Parent Circle, and mainly she came to shout at us and to tell us, you know, how terrible we were as a nation. And I watched her over the years, and she said that I was a good enemy. And then she did the narrative project that we have. It was for grannies, specifically for grannies. And she went to Yad Vashem, to the Holocaust Museum. And when she came out of the Holocaust Museum, she put her hand on Tamara Rabinovitz's shoulder and she said, well, now I understand. And this woman ran a whole embroidery workshop for women in the refugee camp where she gave all the money. She used to arrive at every meeting with a plastic bag loaded with embroidery and nobody could say no. I can't tell you how much useless stuff I have in my house and because of Ahmad. But I loved her because of that caring and because of her generosity. And she was also the head of the Fatah movement in her village. So you can imagine who this woman was and what a loss it is. And how fortunate we are that her family are also in the Parent Circle and will continue the work. But I couldn't come here. Yesterday I was there. I couldn't come and just talk about myself. I wanted you to know about Ahmad because she was such an extraordinary woman. And then the second thing that I want to say, you know, I warned you, is that I've been thinking over the past weeks since the war about the children. What are we going to do for the children in Gaza who were exposed to this terrible war? What kind of people are they going to be when they grow up? How much hatred will they fear and how much fear will they have? And what about the children of Ashdod, Sderot, Ashkelon, all the border towns of Gaza? What kind of human beings are they going to be when they grow up? Is there a way that we can find for them to actually meet each other and understand their humanity? And so whatever I'm saying is like all mixed up because the thoughts are very sad, the times are very strange. We have a new government, which is like Alice in Wonderland, more or less. And I presume you all came with a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream tonight. So, you know, that's the beginning of something interesting. We'll see what comes out of it. So when I lost David, when he was killed by a Palestinian sniper, I mean, I knew that I would do something. I had no idea what it would be, and I didn't know where my life would take me, and how grateful I am for all the extraordinary people who I had, like Laila, who I had the privilege of being part of their transformation. You have to understand how extraordinary that is, and what a gift that is to meet people and to take them out of their hatred or out of their sense of revenge and be a part of that. And so my own personal journey since David was killed, and since I said you can't kill anybody in his name, was really to meet with the man who killed David. Now, I've said all along that one Palestinian killed David, not the Palestinian nation. And that he didn't kill David because he was David, he killed him because of his uniform. Don't imagine that those are easy things to say, and no matter how many times I say it, it still shocks even me. So my idea was I wanted to meet with the sniper, and I wrote a letter to the family. And over the years, with each Minister of Justice, I've tried to get into the jail. And actually, when Tzipi Livni was the Minister of Justice, I got permission from her, and I wanted to use Bassam Aramin as the go-between. I don't talk about, all right, never mind. I knew that I wanted Bassam to be the go-between. And it was quite extraordinary because when she gave me permission, she also gave me permission to have Bassam. And if you know the story of Bassam Aramin, if you have read Aperigon, and I hope you have, I get a commission on every book. No, that's not true. I wish it was. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book written by Colin McCann. And you must, I think it's a must to read. And so here we are. Shiri's on the conversation. Good. So I have no idea what I was telling you. Not a clue.
Going to the prison.
So then we have elections. Of course, we have elections. I mean, it's like every year or so, we waste another billions of shekels, which could have gone to education, to peace work, to the hospitals, to all of that, we waste on another election. But today, the Minister of Police happens to be Omer Bar-Lev, and he comes from the Labour Party. And I phoned on a Saturday night, chutzpah, I'm not lacking in chutzpah. I phoned up Mossi Raz, who from the Meretz Party, he's a member of parliament, and I think one of the kindest, nicest people I know. And I said, look, you've got to get me into the jail. And so he immediately phoned Bar-Lev, and now we have a correspondence going. And I'm hoping that this will happen, because it's a kind of completion. I very much believe in restorative justice, and I hope that this will be the end of that tale. So I took up rather a lot of time, and I want to leave you to ask questions, and mainly ask, if they're horrible questions, ask Laila.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna bring Laila back into the spotlight here. You know, you both spoke about transformation and how being part of the parent circle transformed you, transformed your understanding of the other, so to speak. And I am curious to hear, you know, particularly after this most recent conflict, how has your experience in the work of the parent circle, how has that impacted how you view what happened in May, or a conflict, you know, war in Gaza that's happened since you've been part of the parent circle? How do you understand the conflict given the experience that you've had and the work that you've tried to do through the parent circle?
So first, I'm sure that Laila will want to say something too, but I think one of the things that happened was we had a parallel narrative throughout the whole war. And when you consider what the media said from both sides, you know, it was like living in a different universe. So there was a lot of pain, a lot of anger, but the fact is that we continued to work right throughout the war, and we created a peace square every night where people could come, Palestinians, Israelis, to discuss what was happening, to express their anger. But what we did in the group on Friday was so extraordinary because we needed so much to meet each other physically, even though the Zoom and gloom was actually for us, in a way, an extraordinary privilege, because the Palestinians didn't have to have permission from the powers that be to actually be in our houses. So through Zoom, there was nobody who could tell you you can't meet. But on Friday is the first time that we met physically. And if I haven't got corona now, I guess I never will, because we all kissed and hugged, and I coughed all over each other, smoked, and I don't know what else. So, but we did something very interesting. Because we wanted to diffuse this sense of two narratives, we decided to do something with masks, not masks for corona, big white masks that covered your whole face. And so something like 50 women were covered with white masks. And so you couldn't tell who was who. And this was a kind of indication, you know, for us to understand once again that what binds us together is the shared pain. And there's no difference between me and Laila at night when we go to bed and we cry and the tears are the same color. And this was such a weird feeling, walking around the room and not knowing who was who. Then we took off the mask, and we had a sort of dance therapist, but nobody took much notice of her. But after that, we took the masks and we decorated them. And this is what was very interesting also, because you could suddenly see the anger in some people, the madness in others. If you look at my mask, you'll see feathers and earrings and all kinds of crazy things. But on other masks, there was sadness and some others who are very sort of holier than thou with a pink frame around it. And so it was just, it's more than just a mask. It's discovering who the other is. And there was lots of humor. One of the most serious women in the group is called Mona. But when she got the mask, she went crazy and did mad things with it. So, and then we had a presentation by the women. There have been, for the past 2 years, a group of women, one of which is Laila, who had to create projects. And they had to, this was the serious part of the day, they had to present their projects. And they are quite extraordinary. And when you think about women who never had the opportunity to have education and who didn't have a background like me where I can go and sell a brochure in 2 minutes, but came up with these extraordinary ideas to do photographs. One of the Israeli women is going to talk to the Orthodox Jews, which has never happened for the parent circle. And I'm delighted that that's happening. And we're going to try to slowly introduce them, firstly to us, because it's like 2 nations, and then to the Palestinians, and a group who are doing photographs from hope, from sadness to hope, and all kinds of ideas to mix with other women to bring them to the table. And I was so thrilled with this whole thing, because after all, you know, I've sort of been around for so many years. It's just wonderful to see some new blood coming up and doing new things and thinking about other ways. They had another idea, is to introduce people to the customs of each other by having a Zoom in your house. Like if I would have a Zoom, I could have a British tea party and make cucumber sandwiches or something ridiculous. No, I'm kidding. But I could tell them about South Africa and about my background and where I came from and what is important. And this, we've done a couple of these and I watched them and they were so moving. It's a way of getting to know each other. And so all of this work is, interestingly enough, a lot of the sadness has been put into work from this last war. But please don't forget about the children.
Thank you. Thank you, Robi. I think that's such a powerful image. The sadness has been put into work. And so, Laila, I want to ask the same question of you. How has your experience and transformation in the parent circle impacted the way you saw the most recent war and the conflict overall?
Like it was the first time I faced this situation, the war situation, as a peace activist. In the beginning, I was really confused the first day when we saw the rocket from our window. We saw it in our village and we heard the explosion, and my children were so afraid, and some of them were crying. The first day it was so hard to think about it. But when I think, where am I now and what I'm doing during these 4 years, and the reason why I became a peace activist, I start to rethink about this and say that I should think that I always have this hope inside me, and this hope will always encourage me. I want to not just protect my children, I want to protect everyone, Palestinian, Israeli, every human being. His life is so important to us. So I start to talk to my children in the beginning and start to tell them that not all the Israelis want to do this war, and not every Palestinian who wants this war too. And I showed them that when Robi was called me and she asked about me and my family, and I tell them about Robi and how she is really afraid about me and them. And then one of our Israeli friends called Gili, he called me, and they saw that how we act between each other like family members. So because of that, they start to accept this, and they start to know that not all the people really want this war to be heaven. And I speak to them from our Quran. There's a scripture called, you can't judge the whole people because of mistake of one person. So if just 1 or 2 people want this war, it didn't mean that all the Israelis want this war. Yeah, it was hard time, but in our work inside the forum, we always have that hope that we will do something. And yeah, we achieved some things. Some people asked that after all these years, the peace didn't came yet. But I say that when this organization started, it was start with 1 person. His name is Ishaq Frankenthal, and now we are more than 600 families and more than 2,000 people who, yeah, didn't lost their beloved ones, but they participate in one of the projects because they want to know about the others. They want to share with them, talk to them, understand them. So work is so important. And as we always say that the road of 1 mile start with 1 step. So we should always continue whatever happened here.
Thank you for that. I am curious for both of you, how do you respond? I imagine that not everyone in your family or in your circles agrees with this work or agrees with the idea that not all Israelis want to kill all Palestinians, not all Palestinians want to kill all Israelis. How do you respond when you hear that from people you know and you love? And how do you spread the work of reconciliation and changing that narrative, especially in the aftermath of a war like we just had?
You could find many people who have many ideas, and one of the most important thing that even when they start to accuse you as a traitor and you make normalization, the most important thing not to be nervous and start to shout on them, because will never bring anything, but to start to talk to them I don't know, this experience that I start to have it from the dialogue meeting that we do it in the forum, start to understand how to talk to people in a different level of their ages or whatever their background. You start to realize and start to understand how to talk to them. Like not all the people agree with us and not all of them against us. I will tell you a little story about my father. When I went to Italy before 2 years with the forum to spread the message of peace and reconciliation, I went to Jordan to visit my family for 2 days. And then my father started to say to me, you shouldn't be with them. They're still our enemies and we shouldn't share with them anything. I told him, I want to ask you something. And he said, yes. I told him that, you know, that my son was died, but you know the story and how he died. And he said, no. I told him I stuck in Bethlehem for 11 years, came back to Jordan to visit you because the Israeli government take a decision at uprising that it didn't allow us, the people who are from Jordan, to come back to Jordan. Did you know what happened to me during this 11 years? He said, no. I told him, how could you judge me? How could you ask me to do anything or not to do? This is my life and I'm the only one who takes the decision. I'm the only one who know what is the best for me and what is not. You live here, you didn't know anything about the life there and how it's so hard. And he was shocked because it was the first time I speak to him like that. And I was really shocked because it was the first time I spoke to my father like that. And he said, wow, it's the first time I saw you speak and you have this courage and power. I don't know where you get it, but I know that if you believe in it, so you can do it. So I still didn't agree with you, but it's okay if you want to continue. So it's the way that you could find it to deal with everyone, even if they didn't convinced about what you do, but at the same time, they will take a side not to be against you.
Robi, I want to see if you have other thoughts to add, and then we have one quick question in the chat, and then we'll turn it to Leah. Oh, you're muted, Robi.
Okay, one of the things that we need to learn in the language of peacemaking, in the rhetoric that we use. And I've got a tongue like a viper, so if I want to knock you out, I probably can. But it serves absolutely no purpose. You have to learn to listen with empathy. And the world is so polarized now that this is not only an Israeli-Palestinian problem, this is in your country. And if you don't start to listen to each other, especially if you don't agree, I don't know where this is all going to go. And so I could give you lots of examples of what is the rhetoric of peacemaking and what is the rhetoric of closing people down. But I think the essential lesson that you have to learn is what is about listening with empathy. It's not easy, you know, because one wants to jump in and answer before the person's even finished talking. I suffer from that disease. So it's just, it takes time. And I think when they listen to our personal story, even the hardest of hearts can't not be affected, can't not have an emotional breakthrough. And of course, there are loads of people who think I'm crazy and who write very unpleasant things every time I write an op-ed. But I think, you know, it's like you affect the situation, it doesn't affect you.
Beautiful. There's just one kind of technical question. When you meet in groups, what language do you speak?
We have simultaneous translation, always. Every meeting that we have is translated simultaneously. It makes it a lot more expensive, but it makes it a lot more respectful.
Yeah. So everyone can speak in their native language.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. I want to bring Leah into the conversation now. So I'm going to add you to the spotlight. And to start off by sharing with us, Encounter has worked with Parent Circle for a long time. Many people who go on Encounter trips meet with bereaved parents or bereaved families and hear some of those stories. And so I'm curious to hear your perspective. Like when we hear these stories and we hear the stories themselves of the loss, and also the stories of the transformation, and the stories of the continued willingness to hope and to do and to follow this path. And I'm here in New York, and we have people, looking in the chat in New York and Philadelphia and all over Boston, Cleveland. Like, we're Americans, and most of us here are American Jews. So what should we be doing in your perspective when we hear these stories?
Thanks, Julie. I'm so glad to be here. You're asking a question, what should we be doing? You're asking a question about responsibility, right? Like that's what I hear in your question. And so, and I don't think it's a given. Like you said, you're sitting in New York. I don't think it's a given for every American Jew that they even have a responsibility. I don't know how people on this call feel, but I don't think that's a given. And so I want to talk for a minute about why I do think that American Jews have a role to play and have a responsibility, and then we can talk more about what that looks like. But I want to start with a couple of basic assumptions, which is the first is that, I absolutely agree, Suzanne, that you have a responsibility, but I want to start with why before we talk about what that responsibility is. So I want to start with a baseline assumption that I'm operating on, which is that Israel, the fact of a sovereign Jewish state where I have lived for the last 20-something years, I've lost track at this point, and I'm raising 3 children here, 3 boys. The oldest one will be drafted in, 3 years, which is, I'm really just pretending that 3 years is 20 years, so I don't have to think about it. But, what part of what brought me here, and I think part of what sitting in the United States too, is that Israel really is the greatest, most important Jewish peoplehood project in the last really 2,000 years. Right? What is it? The fact that there is a sovereign Jewish state, we are really living in a time of, I'm not a very religious person, but I would say we're living in a time of really a miracle that this exists and that there is a refuge, a safe haven, the fact that we are able to, the whole idea of self-determination. That's sort of my baseline assumption. And that peoplehood project includes Jews all over the world in so many ways. I don't think I have to go into details about that, but I think it's important to name. Every person on this call is part of that project. And the corollary to that is that if this is the greatest, most important project of the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years, the greatest challenge is what it actually means to be sovereign, to have power, right? As a sovereign state where we are the majority, there is a minority, there are many minorities actually, and the biggest minority is the Palestinians who are living under our sovereignty. And I think it's another thing that's very important to name, because I think, I am just astounded by the work of the Parent Circle. Every time I meet with Robi and with Laila and with Bassem and Rami, who are in the Paragon, and really anyone else, these are people sitting here in this room who have really paid the biggest possible cost and have still chosen to not go into victimhood, not go into defensiveness, not go into blame, but instead to look forward and say, what can we do? There is a parity there that I think can sometimes be deceiving, right? There are Palestinians who have lost loved ones, and there are Israeli Jews who have lost loved ones, and that is very, very those losses cannot be measured. Every single loss is the loss of an entire world, right? And there is a huge power differential, right? We are part of the nation. I, as an Israeli sitting in Jerusalem now, and Robi sitting not far away from me, are part of the people that has the majority of the power. And that brings with it huge responsibility. And I would say that the American Jewish community, which does so much to support Israel in so many ways, whether that is through philanthropy, whether that is through lobbying and political involvement, which we're seeing today, how much that can come up, and the kind of influence that Israel can wield in America and that American Jews can wield on the foreign policy scene, that brings with it tremendous responsibility. And I want to say one more word about responsibility. I'm happy to get into details also, but I do think it's important to think, what does it mean for us to have responsibility, right? There is a kind, I think we sometimes mean two different things when we talk about responsibility. Sometimes when we say somebody is responsible, what we actually mean is that person is to blame. They are responsible, and so they are to blame. And now, right, it's their fault, and therefore it's their job to figure out what to do next, right? It's very easy to fall into a mode of defense, a mode of blame, a mode of finger pointing. Our politicians, and in this case, I would say on both sides, although I really don't like to use the word sides, which I'm also happy to talk about, on both sides of this conflict, are very good at pointing fingers. We've seen a tremendous amount of it in the last few days around this whole Ben and Jerry's, uproar, which is just a repeat of other situations we've seen before. What we are much less good at doing, all of us, is looking in the mirror and saying, there are so many people to blame. Everyone, I can point fingers in a million directions, but what is my role? What is my agency? What can I do? And I believe that every single one of us has power. Every single one of us has agency. Nobody on this call is going to end the conflict, right? That's not your job. I think that's really important to say right now. It's not your job sitting in New York to end the conflict, end the occupation, right? And every single person can take responsibility. I'm going to stop there right now. We can talk more about what that looks like, but I don't want to talk for too long. You're muted.
I do want to kind of move in that a little bit in that direction. Like, well, what does that responsibility look like? I think that there are so many of us, and I'll speak personally here, but this is also kind of taking into account conversations that I had with many of my friends and colleagues in the particularly this spring, this sense of it's so much more complicated and nuanced than the media and social media is presenting. And I don't know what to do to advance what you're talking about, right? Or to advance the vision that Laila and Robi were talking about, of the possibility of reconciliation, of the possibility of repair of some sort, of relationship building, of seeing each other as humanity. Because what can I actually do? So once I feel that sense of responsibility, particularly in a moment of extreme complexity, what do you offer us, or what guidance or frameworks us to think about this?
Yeah, so I want to say something about the framing before I get into that, which is, when I think somebody just messaged me, I'm sorry, I didn't see who in the chat, but I did see the question, like, don't Palestinians also have responsibility? Absolutely. I think every single one of us has agency. And I also think the more power we have, the greater responsibility we have, right? I think it's important to hold both. A few things. The first is, I think that there is a responsibility to see, to really see, meaning to educate ourselves, to learn, to listen to people. Robi was starting to speak about this when she's speaking about listening with empathy, right? But like, to proactively seek out the voices of the people and here I'm speaking as an Israeli Jew, but also as a Jew who, as an American Jew who came here, right? The people with whom we, the Jewish people, are destined to share this land. Because one way or another, this is an important starting point, right? Like, we are here to stay. I have another passport. I have citizenship, my whole family. Like, I could move back to America. My children could move to America. They were all born here. But the vast majority of Israeli Jews do not have other passports. They don't have anywhere else to go. The vast majority of Palestinians, really, we're talking close to 100% of both Israeli Jews and Palestinians, have nowhere else to go. We are here in this land to stay, and our stories are inextricably intertwined. And meaning if you want to understand the Jewish story in this land, you have to understand the Palestinian story. If you care about Jews in this land, we are so intertwined and interdependent that you have to care. Part of what it means to care about Israel and to care about the future security and flourishing of the Jews in this land, we will not win unless we all win, right? There is no security until we're all secure. And so I'm saying that because I think a huge part of our responsibility, I think American Jews, it's kind of a given as engaged American Jews, most mainstream Jewish organizations are very Zionist, explicitly Zionist, and see it as a responsibility to be connected with Israel, to understand Israel, to learn about Israel. So the first thing that I would say about responsibility is, part of that responsibility is learning about Palestinians, understanding Palestinians, seeing Palestinians. I think it is not an exaggeration to say that for so many of us, Israeli and American Jews alike, it is very easy to flatten the conversation and see Palestinians almost as not really even human, right? I think it's a very harsh thing to say, but I know I have experienced that, right? That it's really easy to say, oh, they're behind the wall. I'm sure there are some good Palestinians, but it's a security issue. There are so many terrorists, so many of them support violence. We don't even take the time to stop and say, who are these people? So that's the first responsibility, is really to educate ourselves. That means, organizations like BJ is inviting Laila to be here and to speak and to do more of that, to read books by Palestinians or about Palestinians but really I think, a paragon is an exception, that it is about both Israelis and Palestinians, but it also really represents their voices, but also to read books in Palestinians' voices, to make a concerted effort to learn. And part of that is pushing, the second piece is pushing the organizations that you're a part of or connected to do the same, because I think this is not just about individual learning, but about how the American Jewish community engages on this issue. Is the American Jewish community going to be a force for good, a force for working toward peace, working toward reconciliation, working toward justice and equality and democracy and freedom for all of the people living in this land? In order to do that, Jewish organizations have to shift. And I'm looking around this group, right? Are you involved in Hillels or day schools or camps or trips or federations? Or there are so many Jewish organizations that don't have this on their agenda. It's not because they're bad. It's because it's not anywhere on the agenda. And I think everyone here can play a role wherever you sit in pushing that agenda, that we actually need to look toward understanding and learning and seeing who the Palestinians are who are living alongside Jews and will continue one way or another. Like, we can either share this land by killing a bunch of each other every few years, or we can share this land by moving past that and finding a better future. There's one more, but do you want me to keep going, or do you want to go to another question?
Yeah, let's stay with this. And I do have one other question, to come back to something you said before. But go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the last thing that I will say is, I think that there is a responsibility. So the first one is really to see and understand Palestinians. The second one is sort of to embrace inextricability, right? To embrace the idea that Palestinians are part of the Jewish story in this land, and therefore we have a responsibility to to learn and understand and care about Palestinians. And the third one I would say is around moral courage. And why am I saying that? I have heard so many Jewish leaders, so many. I mean, we've brought like around 500 American Jewish leaders to the West Bank and East Jerusalem over the last 5 years. We did lots of work before that too, but senior level Jewish leaders. And so many of them are transformed and want to go back to the organizations and lead in new ways. And over, I hear from them, you know, I really want to lead. I want to bring a Palestinian to speak at my synagogue, but I am afraid. It's a risk, right? I'm going to get pushback from my congregants. I'm going to get pushback from my students. I'm going to get pushback from my donors. I might lose donors or congregants or students or constituents. This is a communal shift that needs to happen, right? That to enable leaders to have the moral courage, everyone has to have that moral courage, but it has to start somewhere. Creating a space in which we can say that being pro-Palestinian and being pro-Israel are not actually in conflict. Right? Being pro-Israel can also mean being pro-Palestinian, because ultimately we want to be pro-life. We want to be pro-equality, pro-democracy, pro-justice, all of those things are require moral courage because there's such a fear in the Jewish community. And I think it comes from both sides. So if you're a Jewish leader, if you're a rabbi or a teacher, or you run a Jewish organization or you work for a Jewish organization, it's having the moral courage to say this is important. And if you're a constituent of any of those, and you might be both, right, in different settings, right? Like I know parents who are writing to the people running their children's Israel programs and saying, why aren't you hearing from a few Palestinians? You're in Israel for 5 weeks. Where are the Palestinians at your program? What are you doing to understand this story? Right? So that I would say is the third one. And I think it is really hard. It is really hard to stand in the space of having the moral courage to say, I care about Israel and I also care about Palestinians. It sounds so simple, but it's hard. Like I've gotten soft accusations of being a traitor, like sitting in Israel. I'm sure Robi has as well and Laila has as well. And being willing to take that pushback and to sort of stand firm.
I just wanted to say one thing about all of this talk about pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. One of the things that is terribly important for the diaspora to understand is that when they are pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, what they are doing is importing our conflict into their country and creating hatred between Jews and Muslims. It's not intentional, but that's actually what happens, and that's what happens on all the campuses. And in England, it's not only American based, it's all over. And half of the people who are anti-Israel or anti-Palestine couldn't find either place on a map. And so the knowledge that you need to bring is knowledge of what is happening, not the pro anything. They just must realize that they are doing more damage to relations in their own country between Jews and Muslims. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Christians who come in from side to side, also taking certain sides and causing more hatred.
Yeah.
It's for nothing. Doesn't help. I'd rather you stayed away from us altogether and didn't take a side and just leave me alone and let me get on with it.
So that's a great question, and I'll bring Laila into this as well. You know, how do we talk about this, or what's your advice or suggestions for, because there is this language, there is a discourse and a rhetoric that has been established in the American Jewish context, certainly, of how we talk about this, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, you can't be both. And I think, again, particularly with regard to this last war, I and many people I know felt like there was no way to be in the middle ground. There was no middle ground, right? You had to pick a side. If you said anything about the children in Gaza who were being killed, then you were anti-Israel and you were anti the idea that Israel could defend itself and had a right to exist. And if you were saying anything about, the thousands of rockets being launched, then there was no place to have nuance and to say what you said before, Leah, that everyone has some responsibility in this. So where have you seen the rhetoric shift, or where is the possibility for the rhetoric shifting?
For me, I saw it in the middle, like not pro-Palestine, not pro-Israel, but pro-peace. This is what we need, because we both want to live our life, and this is what our work is for. We try to make the future for our children and our grandchildren to be normal as possible. We try to do our best to really to bring the normal life to everyone, not just for the Israelis, not just for the Palestinian, because we both live in this land. No one will leave it, not the Israeli, not the Palestinian, and we should learn how to live side by side and work with each other in any kind, in any field. I think once someone was asked me if they ask me if I will agree about one state or two states, and I said, if the Israeli and Palestinian government, they put their hands together and make peace, we will be the most important and powerful country in the whole world, because both sides have great people. And if they connect with each other and have a real peace, we will be a great nation. So I don't believe that we could separate it and be two countries. This is what I think, Yoav.
Truly, I wanted to say thank you, and also to Leah for inviting us. It's important, and I think for the guests that are on this program, we are able to do these meetings. Where is Anita? I want Alicia. I can only see half your head. Here you are. Would you consider inviting us to your church? I actually spoke there many, many years ago. And we'd love to talk to your congregation as well. It's so important that they hear another message. And of course, everybody else on this Zoom is welcome to be in touch with us. And Anita and Shiri will put how to get a hold of you. And join our newsletter, because then you'll know when we come to the States and when we are there. And perhaps you'd like to invite us. And by the way, many, many rabbis have a lot of guts. If they could invite us to come to me and Bassam to a synagogue on Yom Kippur, on the day of Yom Kippur, and talk about forgiveness, I think that was an extraordinary gesture. And there were 3,000 people who listened. So what more could I ask than that? So for all those that are scared, it's mainly just because they're scared. But they should just get their act together and try to bring another message. And bringing a message of the parent circle doesn't harm anybody. It can only bring more love.
Yeah. I'll just add to what Laila and Robi both said. I think that a lot of this work truly starts from it starts inside. It starts really internalizing it. And I will say, I think for me, it took a long time, right? Because and here I'm speaking as part of a Jewish people, like we have so much intergenerational trauma from hundreds, really thousands of years. It's not over, right? There's anti-Semitism. Like, it's so easy to come to this issue kind of wanting to believe, but really being from a place of tremendous fear and trauma. And I think I think the starting point is really working on internalizing what does it mean to actually believe. Like, I am at a place now, having spent a lot of time getting to know Palestinians and Israeli Jews, but that wasn't work because that's, who I live with every day. to a point where for me, I don't actually see two sides anymore. I mean, I know we live in a reality where there are two sides, but for me, the commitment to Palestinians is like part and parcel of my commitment to Jews in this land, because we are all inhabitants of this land. These are my neighbors, these are my friends, these are people who I care really deeply about, and who I know share that vision of dignity for all, of justice for all, of equality for all, of freedom for all. Like, there's a real internal shift that has to happen. And I think it takes work. And I think it happens from meeting with Israeli Jews, meeting with Palestinians, hearing people's realities, hearing people's lived experiences, sort of moving past the headlines, like really making a commitment to move past the headlines and the vitriol, to internalize the idea that there actually is no zero-sum game here. That's a false binary. We really, I believe, like, and I will say one last thing about this. You know, there was a quote. I started doing this work after the last Gaza war, which was 7 years ago, when I kind of, you know, my kids were obviously 7 years younger then. I had 3 young boys at that point, and running back and forth with them to the safe room, the shelter. And shortly, and really that was the point at which I sort of said, like, if I made a decision to raise my children here, I actually can leave, right? The fact that I am choosing to live here gives me a responsibility. And if I'm going to keep subjecting my children to this, I need to do whatever it takes to change the reality. And shortly after that, Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time was asked in an interview, will we live by the sword forever? And he said, yes, that is our reality. We will live by the sword forever. That's the reality, right? And it might be naive. Robi might be naive. Laila might be naive. I might be naive. I choose to be naive rather than to accept that as our destiny. But I think that really requires an internalization of the idea that we do not have to live by the sword forever. There actually is another possibility. And I would say that's where I would start. I think it's important to speak, whether that's on social media or at Shabbat dinners or among friends, to speak about that. But the first step is really to internalize that.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I know there have been some questions in the chat and people have pinged folks directly, but I just want to open it. We have a few more minutes and to see if anyone has questions for all of these speakers or for anyone in particular. If you could raise your little Zoom hand.
Oh,
Alicia, go ahead.
oh yeah, I couldn't find the Zoom hand. I just want to thank everybody. I just wrote a long-winded short message, if that makes any sense, to Robi. And I just want to thank her, Laila and Leah, because I love the idea of the possibility of you guys coming to New York or Zoomed in. I don't know what the configuration would be to have this dialogue at St. Paul St. Andrew United Methodist Church. I just want to let you know, and with me saying that, as a member, I can bring this request forth, but I wrote some details in the chat on how maybe me, surely there could be some sort of intro and the Zoom call dialogue or some part of it be part of the invitation piece, because I know that there's some work that the church already does and is more than willing, very open, the leadership is very open. I can't speak for every member, but the breadth of the church is we are open to this kind of dialogue. So I don't see that being problematic. But I just wanted to say that out loud in case somehow the Zoom chat thing got disappears. and thank you.
Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? You can raise your Zoom hand or just jump in.
So go out and buy 6 pints of Ben and Jerry's, everybody. Goodbye.
So I'll close then with first noting that the links to both organizations have been put in the chats, and counterprograms.org and parentcircle.org, I believe. They're in the chat, or parentcirclefriends.org. So please go to visit those websites to learn more about the organization, subscribe to the newsletters to see how you can support the organizations financially or in other ways. And I will just, when we were preparing for this session, I was talking to Leah about how can we have hope, and Leah was expressing some concern that when we have too much hope, it's like, it's passive, right? I'm just going to hope that someone else takes care of it so I can feel hopeful. And that's a nice thing, but that sort of absolves me of my responsibility. And I said, one of the most powerful distinctions that I've heard, which I really carry with me a lot these days, particularly, is a distinction between hope and optimism that was made by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And you can Google this. He has written about this in many places, and I think in various talks that are online. And he says optimism is passive. Optimism is saying, it'll work out. It'll all be fine. Someone will figure it out. It'll be okay. But hope is actually a religious imperative, because hope means I have hope that it can be different. I have hope that the world can be better. And by saying that and feeling that, it means I have a responsibility to contribute to that change. And that, I think, is very much what we've been hearing from the three of you in different ways, in your own experiences and the work that you do. And I think what we wanted to accomplish in this conversation is to leave with a sense of hope, not hope that you'll take care of it, Parent Circle will take care of it, Encounter will take care of it, but that we can all actually do some work and take some of that responsibility and agency to move things in a different direction, so that we are not living forever by the sword. So I thank you so much for your time and your emotion and wisdom. I know it's not easy to talk about these things and tell some of these stories, and we're very, very deeply grateful to Parent Circle, to Encounter, to you, Leah, to Robi, to Laila. Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. God bless you.
God bless
Have a
you.
good
God bless you
afternoon
all.
and evening, everyone. Thank you.